Hi, my name is Gretchen Goldman. I'm the research director in the Center for Science and Democracy at the Union of Concerned Scientists. And today I'm going to be talking about 2021 priorities for a new administration around science. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. My co-author is Jacob Carter, who's also with the Union of Concerned Scientists. So 4 years ago, I was at the AGU conference, and outside of that conference was a rally of scientists. And I was very skeptical about whether scientists would attend this rally at a conference like this. But as you can see, I was proven wrong because scientists showed up and stood up for science, both literally and figuratively. And this was the first indication to me that something was going to be different about this political era, that we were going to see scientists engage in new ways, and then there might be new threats to science that we hadn't anticipated. And I was concerned about this too, given the rhetoric of the Trump campaign. We knew there was a risk that science would be challenged under this administration. I wrote a piece in Science calling attention to this and where the opportunities and the vulnerabilities existed in protecting science. And a few months later at the American Association for the Advancement of Science meeting, I sat on a panel and talked about this issue with others in science policy. And it turns out many other scientists were concerned about this too, because we saw a tremendous attendance at that event. This was right during an inauguration of President Trump. And so we were really in a different place in terms of the concern and the risks to science. So as the administration started, we started to see some of those concerns be realized. So I'm going to go through some of the things that we learned in recent years about how science is doing at the federal level, both challenges and progress. So after a year into the Trump administration, we started to see some changes that were noticeable on a larger scale. This is scientific advisory committees that failed to meet as often as their charters directed, and we saw this increase after President Trump was elected. We started to see many of those science advice committees really fail to meet. Some of them were disbanded altogether, and others on them, the independent scientists were replaced. And so that independent external science advice that feeds into the government seemed to be taking a hit under this administration. And we can also look at the vacancies in scientific leadership. So across the government, there are science positions that need to be filled by the president. And under the Trump administration, a little less than half of them were ever even filled. So this was a big vacancy compared to the previous two administrations, where both the George W. Bush and the Barack Obama administrations did fill all of those scientific spots. So there was a real gap in leadership in recent years. And we also observed in the last 4 years a lot of attacks on federal science. And by this, we mean attacks on the process by which science informs policymaking. So this is not just policy moves that have a scientific angle. Administrations, of course, have the right to choose their policy priorities, but they shouldn't get to undermine the process by which science and scientists inform that. So we started to see things in this category, from restrictions on attendance to conferences for scientists working for the government. We saw the sidelining of those science advisory committees, the politicization of scientific grants and funding, which should be reviewed by agency career staff and not political appointees. We saw a lot of rolling back of data collection, data accessibility issues, a lot of censorship of government scientists at times when they should have been able to speak either to the media or the public. A lot of scientific studies that were halted or edited or suppressed in some way. And then there's a bucket which we're calling anti-science orders, rules, regulations. And these are things where there was interference in how science is even able to inform the process. So changes in process, cutting science out of the picture in various ways. And so when we add up all of these things that occurred in all the instances, we see that this was actually happening on a pretty broad scale across federal agencies. We've logged more than 173 total attacks on science and counting. So this is a pretty big jump in the instance of these things. And in fact, we saw that this in fact was a big jump and different than previous administrations. We published a study looking back 7 decades at what has happened. And in doing that, we find that the Trump administration is representing a continuation, but an escalation of these patterns of scientific integrity loss. In particular, this meant that many of Trump administration's actions have origins in the work of prior administration, but that others fit with an unprecedented narrative, including the uniquely open disregard for the conclusion of its own scientists. So we're really in a new era where we're seeing science sidelined in new ways, in more ways than we've seen in recent years. And so that's a lot of the current context that we're dealing with now in looking at what can we do moving forward, and what are the opportunities to build back and build better a lot of the science that we're seeing. And another concerning trend that we observed I wanted to raise is around what we're hearing from scientists around staff departures. In 2018, we surveyed federal scientists across agencies and asked them how it was going in terms of scientific integrity and science and decision making from where they sat. And across the board, we saw that agencies did feel that, or scientists rather, did feel that they had noticed workforce reductions at their agency, staff departures, retirements, and hiring freezes. This is a big problem because it means that we are losing capacity to do science in the government. And this is happening at a time when federal agencies were already constrained by what they could do in terms of staffing, right? They're already always expected to do more with less, and that situation was increasingly so. And on top of that, now we're losing a lot of the expertise. Much of the expertise of the government now is anyway nearing retirement age statistically, and so we're looking at big gaps in expertise and disruptions to the pipeline by which younger early career scientists get into the federal government. And if we can look at progress on what we have seen that's been improvements on scientific integrity, there's actually a few things to say. One is that we've learned a lot about the conditions that lead to a loss of scientific integrity from tracking all of these attacks, from looking at policy analyses. We know where there are more challenges. So one is a lack of clear and consistent policies can lead to a loss of scientific integrity, an unsupportive or hostile work environment for doing science, ineffective or absent leadership at the agency level or even the White House level, any lack of transparency about the decision-making process, which can lead to a lack of accountability for those who are making decisions and how. And if you combine these conditions with any undue influence of political, financial, or ideological forces, you really have a recipe for a loss of scientific integrity. And so if we know about what these factors are, then we can use that to figure out how to safeguard science against those situations. And that's largely what agencies have been working on over the past decade or so. So this is a chart of agencies that are on the y-axis. We have different policies or other scientific integrity infrastructure across the x-axis. And this is a traffic light scheme. So green is a strong policy, yellow is some progress, and red is non-existent or poor. And the thing I want you to notice about this is that before 2008, much of this chart would have been red because most agencies didn't have much in terms of policies or infrastructure around scientific integrity. And that's changed a lot. We've gotten all of these boxes moved up to yellow or green, and that's a lot of policies, that's people in place, that's processes that help agencies and scientists navigate this issue. It's safeguards that protect the role of science and scientists in the process. So we've really come a long way in terms of advancing protections at the federal level, and we know exactly how to advance all those. And another piece from that 2018 survey of federal scientists I wanted to pull out was what scientists said about their agency's adherence to scientific integrity policies. When we look at this, we see that by and large, even in the Trump era, we saw that scientists reported that they felt like their agency was adhering to their scientific integrity policy. This is important because this shows that those policies are working, they are in place, they're being followed, but the challenges that we're facing is that go beyond the policy. So we know that there's other challenges that are either outside of the scope of the policy, and there's big discrepancies in the quality of policy between agencies. So this is something that we need to work on, but this was heartening to see that people did feel like their agency was adhering to the policy, and we just need to think about how do we get beyond that. So when we look at priorities for advancing science moving forward, we have a lot of work to do, and we know how to do it. So there's lots of low-hanging fruit on this front, and some specifics that we know agencies can do to help address some of the attacks on science that we saw in the Trump era, and also just how to strengthen it further from what we saw, and where can we go from here. So we have created a series of priorities for the Biden administration. This is a whole set of reports on different aspects of this, and I'm going to give you a little sample of what those are. But if you go to that link, there's our whole set of recommendations in various ways, and it gets pretty granular in terms of topics and agency-specific recommendations as well. So there's a set of recommendations on just advancing science and decision making, protecting it from interference, ensuring that it can independently inform decision makers, and that happens in a transparent way. There's a lot around strengthening scientific integrity policies and thinking about how to really make those changes robust and consistent across agencies. There's promoting public participation. How do we ensure there is adequate public input, especially from affected communities that are most impacted by scientific policies? There's lots of content on addressing conflicts of interest. One challenge in recent years has been the appointment of agency leadership that have direct ties to regulated industry. This compromises the ability of agencies to use independent science to make decisions. And also prioritization of justice and equity. There's lots of potential for the Biden administration to really center those issues, to really look at who is disproportionately affected or not receiving the benefits of science in policymaking. So we have a fact sheet on that as well. And we also went into specific agencies, and so ways that specific agencies can do. There's things that can happen at the White House level, and there's things that can happen at the agency level. So we dug in on some of those things because some of the challenges are uniquely positioned at different agencies. And the last point I wanted to raise around a long-term challenge is going to be rebuilding that agency capacity, that lost staff, that challenges about who's leaving, and that lost expertise. This is something that the new administration should prioritize, and we'll need to think about in the scientific community as well, in how do we ensure that good scientists are going into government and doing that important work that we need. There's also a role for the Hill. This is the Scientific Integrity Act is something that Congress has been pushing in recent years. It passed the House last year, and we have new potential next year for this to advance, and so the Congress can play an important role. And I just wanted to say my mind was changed in these 4 years, that I was skeptical that scientists would engage and step up into the policy realm under the Trump administration, but I was blown away that was not the case, and scientists were very much willing to do so. This is me speaking at a meeting where a group of scientists had voluntarily come to volunteer their time and expertise to inform a policymaking process, despite the Trump administration dismissing them. And it was just a unique moment of me seeing just how willing the scientific community was to step up and do the right thing and volunteer their time and expertise to ensure that science informs decision making. And so I think we're in a good place, and I'm very thankful for the scientific community's engagement around these issues. Thank you so much for your time.